Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Akine. I'm Senior Director of Marketing at Vistara, and I will be your host today for our webinar on transforming IT as a service provider. Vistara provides a powerful SaaS-based IT operations management platform that offers a single pane of glass view and control of an entire organization's IT infrastructure. We enable enterprises and service providers to handle the two big fundamental shifts in IT today: the federation of physical and virtual infrastructure, elements across on-prem, private cloud, and public cloud deployments, and to leverage remote services from external partners to manage these distributed elements, both trends that we will talk about more today. Vistara has over 1,000 end customers and 100 partners on the platform today, and we integrate with a broad ecosystem of cloud and technology partners to provide the most comprehensive coverage in the market. Our agenda today is threefold, and I want to highlight what I hope you get from our time. First, let's take some time to discuss the key trends that impact what you do and will do in IT operations management. Next, we'll talk about how we're defining IT as a service provider and how do some of the trends drive challenges in meeting the demands of the business in a nimble and effective way. It'd be great to hear from you later about where you think you are in this evolution. Then we'll show you what some of the solutions to these challenges look like in action with the Vistara platform. And finally, I hope you stay for the Q&A at the end, where we'll also have Varma Kunaparaju, Vistara's Chief Technology Officer, join for some Q&A and discussion. The three key trends that we think will continue to fundamentally change IT operations management: our cloud, shadow IT, and the federation of the IT supply chain. Now, I know none of these will be new to you, but what we want to talk about today is how this is going to impact what we do in IT operations management. And actually, as I was putting this together, I was curious on just how trendy cloud and shadow IT work in particular, and you can find this from, there's a handy tool that Google has around providing relative search interest over time. And you can see that shadow IT has been invoked as a term for a number of years now, and cloud has really picked up steam in the last 2 years. So let's highlight some of the key elements of these mega trends that affect IT operations management and IT's ability to be a service provider to the business. So what about cloud? I thought this graphic was really interesting. That shows different perspectives of cloud. It shows that different constituencies have really different meanings of what cloud can be. I think that impacts what you do as an IT organization when you're working with multiple stakeholders. So Gartner says, and in many cases, the discussion resembles the famous story of 5 blindfolded men examining an elephant, each coming back with a completely different image of what they just saw, from a fire engine to a climbing wall to a giant fan. So let's define why cloud matters in our context today. And I think it's three things. It's the ubiquity, it's the growth and the trajectory, and the complexity in managing it. So we all know public cloud is massively and growing market. It's already $158 billion worldwide market this year, and it's growing at 17% CAGR to nearly $300 billion in 4 years. We often talk about the commoditization of public cloud and IaaS, but it's still expected to bring in $132 billion to cloud providers in the next 4 years. Private cloud has been the next wave of cloud that's being fully realized now. And as of last year, nearly half of large enterprises had a private cloud service, and 72% thought they would have one in place by 2014. What's relevant for our discussion going forward is that management and operational processes around private cloud was most daunting to the folks who were pulled, and we think that's one of the key value adds that a central IT organization can provide. And finally, on hybrid cloud. As you see, this is in the next wave, as there's not going to be many organizations where you have a pure public or private cloud model. and IT will increasingly have to understand how do you have a hybrid cloud strategy that combines both internal and external clouds. And the research says that nearly half of large enterprises will have hybrid cloud deployments within the next few years. So in context of IT operations management and where we'll go with becoming a service provider to the business, you know, cloud is here to stay. It's ubiquitous. It's massively growing, and it's going to be highly complex. Onto shadow IT. Technology purchases and management outside of IT's approval has exploded with the advent of cloud-based apps that make buying and consuming them so simple. But as you know, shadow IT isn't just about BYOD or consumer devices. It's about business work being done outside the purview of IT. It can be anything from productivity tools to backup, file sharing. Marketing technology is obviously a big source of IT, especially on the budget side. And the impact of this on an enterprise or IT organization ranges from security to compliance to having the visibility into what's really going on with the business and the technology that's running it. So how widespread is it? This is one data point. Straticat did a survey at the end of last year of several hundred IT and line of business users, and they found that, you know, out of the average company uses about 20 SaaS applications, of which more than 7 are non-approved. Now, one data point, that means that over a third of the apps in their company might be using purchased without oversight. And by the way, they also found that the worst offenders are the gatekeepers themselves. So you can see in the charts that IT employees are more likely than business users to use non-IT approved apps, and actually even more of them than a line of business user. And there are a number of reasons for that. They think they're more expert at keeping everything secure and managing, and also know how to get around whatever policies and controls. So, you know, again, today's conversation is less about, you know, I think most people are in agreement it's here to stay and that it needs to be managed, but from an IT operations manager standpoint, what does that mean for what you do? And then finally, the major trend that Vistara sees in the market for IT operations management is the federation of IT, and we talk about this a lot. Both the infrastructure and resources that we think are being increasingly federated, that are being sourced from not only your traditional on-premise and internal sources, but from an infrastructure standpoint, your resources can come from on-premise, virtual, public, private, or a mix of infrastructure sources. And then if you think about the expertise that's required to manage this increasingly complex infrastructure, IT personnel is also going to be highly distributed, as the expertise required to do this, it gets so much broader. And it might not even be the traditional external partners you think of, but you have OEM, technology vendors, system integrators, and new kinds of partners that you might be working with to manage that IT environment. Putting that together is a single pane of glass, and we see that operations platforms will have to be integrated so that you can bring this IT operations management and the service management together. Now, a few numbers to show this. Outsourcing, as you can see in the bottom left, it's as a term, it's been on the downward trend. It's a basic, most people think of outsourcing as an IT service. But with the advent of cloud and mobile, the kinds of things that are, quote, outsourced are changing. And if you look at it or think about it from an IT supply chain perspective, many organizations already have a mixed model where they do have partly outsourced, in addition to in-sourced supply chains, and it looks like it is going to, on the average, continue to grow. Gartner also defines IT outsourcing, again, not as the way I think most of us think of traditional IT outsourcing, but you can see between 2013 and 18, infrastructure as a service, data center outsourcing, infrastructure utility services. These kinds of infrastructure elements will continue to grow as outsourced or distributed sourcing of infrastructure and resources. This is something that I found that I thought really illustrated that distribution of the IT supply chain being really federated. You know, it talks about your infrastructure and your operations, and you can see the real 360. You could have private infrastructure, you could have shared infrastructure, you can have private operations or shared operations. And IT being in the middle of all this is increasingly going to have to take this broker or provider approach to make sure you're getting the right models in place for the different business needs that you have, which is a great segue to, you know, let's talk a little bit about IT as a service provider. So there's a number of terms in the market that convey a similar paradigm shift of IT delivering shared IT operations and service management as a service to multiple lines of business in an enterprise that we're referring to as IT as a service provider. The definitions and the perspectives of the definers may be a little different, but ITAS, IT as a service broker, hybrid IT, internal cloud service broker, touch upon this concept. And I thought the Gartner quote here captured it really well. Ultimately, the role of the IT organization is to be the value-added enabler for the most effective and efficient use of services across the enterprise. And I think that's really what we're aiming to talk about today. You know, what are the challenges in doing this? What does this organization look like? And then, you know, how do you actually bring that to life? So let's look at some of the characteristics of what this service provider looks like. You know, first, you're taking on, or you have the responsibility to delegate the fulfillment of these IT services. As we talked about before, the IT organization has to determine whether the best resource is going to be internal or external, whether it's going to be sourced, you know, from internal and on-prem, from a public cloud or private cloud that you might have. And if you think about, you know, geographically, it might be distributed around the world as well. In order to do this, you need holistic visibility. So not individual silos, you know, your cloud services here, your private cloud infrastructure here, the different on-prem legacy infrastructure that you might have, you know, your managed service provider here and your internal IT team. All of these have to be unified, and you need visibility. You know, your individual teams may not, but a command center is required to really govern and manage that appropriately. Now, as a service provider, there's also an expectation that you're going to be meeting service levels, and that's the way you would need to operate with your business providers or business stakeholders. So how do you do that? At the same time, you know, you want to provide reporting, planning. How do you bring all this information together so that you actually are giving insights back to the business and figuring out how to improve what you're doing? You want to be able to bring these capabilities to the business in a scalable and secure way. All of this together with the governance makes you compliant. And, you know, we really think that you want to provide not just holistic visibility, but the end-to-end IT operations lifecycle management. So from the day you turn it on to, you know, upwards of years later when you're turning off your infrastructure and services. let's talk a little bit about the IT operations lifecycle management. So there's, three core elements of what you do in the IT operations lifecycle, and it's, managing the day-to-day. You find out what's working, what's not working, and make sure that you're able to remediate immediately the things that aren't. You have maintenance, everything from patch and configuration, automation, and then the last piece that we just touched on, the reporting, the capacity planning. The things that you want to do to make sure that you're using your resources the most effectively and in the best interest of the business. And you see this life cycle of all these different elements that come together. And this is what we really see as the end-to-end life cycle. And if, think about the day one and the end of life of all these things, they all come together. And, there's a lot of things that through provisioning, we really believe that the value to the business is going to come from being able to make the most out of the lifetime of your IT infrastructure. So let's shift gears and show you what delivering shared IT operations and service management as a service to multiple lines of business in an enterprise looks like by going through some use cases in the Vistara platform. So we'll demonstrate the following scenarios. The first is a single pane of glass for IT infrastructure and services across multiple lines of business with the new kinds of complexity and service levels that IT needs to provide. Having the unified command center to segment and see across the heterogeneous IT environment that includes multiple clouds will be critical to operating as a service provider. The auto-discovery of new resources that are onboarded in your business. We talked about the challenge of unapproved IT resources that are being used for work. So the solution is a combination of the right policies and tools. Vistara allows you to set rules to automatically discover new IT elements as they come online. And reporting on service level agreements, another key component of IT being a service provider, that you have the ability to report on your performance against agreed to service levels and start to provide the business insights on how to do better. And then self-service reporting. Finally, you want to enable your internal clients to have high-level visibility and reporting at the touch of their fingers, and we'll show you how that might work. Let's switch gears over to the Vistara platform. Now, you can see we're going to log on. In this case, you can't see, we enable two-factor authentication to make this especially secure. Let's say that we are the IT operations management shared service organization for Acme Corporation. We have a number of business units that you can see, and as the super admin for Acme, I can see the entire infrastructure. I can go into specific business units and see how they're doing. And so I have the ability to fully segment the business into its logical components, and also we'll look at a little bit later providing the users the appropriate views based on their roles and the rules that you put around that. So the dashboard shows you, the general health of IT. You can see the total number of devices you have, the kinds of alerts that you're bringing in, tickets that are open, and what we talked about before. What are the resources that you have, and you can see them in one view. So we think this is really important. We talked before about your ability to have a unified dashboard across all of your infrastructure. You'll see here that in this dashboard, you can't see the difference, or the physical elements, the cloud elements, the VMs all appear in one dashboard. So you don't have to go between them to see what's going on. You'll see in one place your converged infrastructure like vSpec and vBlock, your Rackspace cloud, your AWS cloud, Azure, in addition to your servers, your storage devices, and your network infrastructure, all in one place, and you can see what's going on with them. But what's more important to you being able to work with a business is that you can express these IT elements as a service. So we'll take a look at one service view, a way to place orders. So we can see through the service map that this process is made up of four processes. So there's a client handler, there's core services, you can see the global front-end system. In this case is down. You can actually go to the device and see what you need to do to bring it back up. In the service map, it leads straight to the infrastructure elements that you need to manage, and you're able to go in and see all the details that you need to actually fix the problems that might be occurring. So you can see all the applications, any patches that are required to be done, configuration, monitors, all the graphs. As you see, you would have one single pane of glass to do everything you need out of this platform. So moving on to the auto discovery of new resources that are onboarded in your business. So when you go into the setup, you have the ability to set up the discovery and deployment profile so that anytime a new device comes online in your network, you have the ability to automatically discover it and logically place it within the groups that makes sense in your business. So, for example, using it as a gateway, you can select what kind of devices they are. And in this case, you can even set up a public cloud by going and say you want an AWS server, or when an AWS server comes online, you know which of the credentials that you want to associate with it, and you can enable schedules to do that. Next, let's move on to reporting on the service level agreement. So within the reporting, you want to be able to show to the business how you are performing against the different metrics that you might have agreed to. The reporting is set up. You can go create for any of the individual businesses a report. You can make it visible to you or to the other users that you've been able to do so by reporting period. Scheduling this now will create this in your dashboard. It's going to take a few minutes, so we're going to open up a report that we had opened previously. Let's pull this up. You can see that within this report, it automatically pulls together the high-level activities that you've been doing to manage this business unit's IT operations. See the number of devices, the alerts, the ticketing, what the availability looks like, as well as the kinds of things you've been doing for preventive maintenance. Further in the report, it will go into, how are you doing in terms of response and addressing the incidents that are occurring. And then the kinds of things around resolution, when are these issues occurring, and who you can talk to. So the reports there's over 100 templates that you can choose from, and obviously you have the ability to customize as you need to meet the requirements you have for reporting to your business. And finally, one of the things that you do want is the ability to self-service report and see the kinds of activity that's going on within their infrastructure. So the customer, let's take a look at the executive report. Again, similarly, you can set up, who do you want it to have it visible to? Let's, for the logistics arm of your business, let's have it available to just the clients. You can actually add the clients that you want to send it off to. And we'll pull up one of the reports that's already been created, and it can actually be done in a PowerPoint format or PDF, so that you can go in and customize as you need to. So you can see that for the report, you can see the executive summary of everything that's been going on, and you'd be able to modify your reporting as needed. And your business stakeholders have the ability to go in and do this themselves. In order to make sure you have the right access, you can set up your user groups, the roles, the permission sets, so that the right people have the edit access, the admin access, the views to the appropriate parts of the platform. You can see this is what it looks like for a general environment here. And so this allows you to give the right level of visibility and management if your business units require it, and also to change that depending on the needs that each of your stakeholders might have. We hope that now you have a good understanding of the key trends that impact what you do in IT operations management and what IT as a service provider might mean for you and your organization, and then what some of the solutions to get there look like in action with Vistara. So on to the Q&A, and I'd like to welcome Varma Pinofaraju, who is Vistara's Chief Technology Officer.
Good morning. Hopefully this overview gave the evolution of an internal enterprise IT to more transform and become a service provider. And before we open the question and answer, I just wanted to kind of summarize based on what our observations in serving large enterprises in North America, what the key trends that we have seen in this transformation as a service provider. To summarize the discussion from the last half an hour, the number one thing that is happening in this evolution of IT as a service provider is resources being consumed, resources being made available by internal enterprise IT traditionally has been transforming to be able to consume from external sources, be it private or public clouds, and make those resources available on demand to internal business units. That's the number one trend. And in that trend, to keep the central control of the IT and make sure even though those resources are coming from external public and private clouds, there is a need for building a command center and making the command center operate so that internal IT has complete visibility even though those resources are getting consumed from external sources. That's number one thing that we see. And most enterprise IT organizations that we speak to where the private and public clouds are getting consumed, they wanted to have those private and public clouds integrated with on-premise internal IT in a single command center and a single dashboard. That's number one thing that we see. And mechanisms to do and allow that consumption of those external resources is one of the things that is critical for transforming internal IT to become a service provider. Number two is equally important in our mind and in our customers and partners' mind is internal IT needs to act like a business unit level reporting, where each business unit that they serve being able to give service availability and SLA driven reports. What has been done, beyond infrastructure as a service or beyond giving platform as a service, overall application availability. If internal IT is serving marketing group and are serving finance group, what are those applications that the marketing and the finance groups are using? What are their availability? How many resources have been consumed? What is the amount of effort that the internal IT spend for that business unit? It's not just, okay, you have 200 VM instances that you consumed from Amazon and 300 instances that you consumed from my private cloud, and here is the number of physical infrastructure elements that is consumed. But beyond that, internal IT organizations spent, processing 20,000 events during the period of June, during the month of June, and those 20,000 events resulted in 5,000 instances that we have to process, out of which 20 outages took place, and we kept the SLA at 99.99 because the internal IT team consumed X number of hours to maintain this entire application environment for you. Being able to give that visibility to business unit head and having a meeting with the business unit head saying that here are the number of resources that is consumed from an infrastructure point of view, here is the manpower that is consumed on top of the infrastructure to keep the health of the applications that we maintained during the month of June and what it really resulted in. That's the second level of thing. Then the third most important thing that some matured IT organizations are also doing is, business unit-based billing and accounting, right? And this billing and accounting is not at the infrastructure element level again. It is at the manpower and the infrastructure and everything that is included in the IT created as a SKU. So some of the IT organizations that we spoke to, they created a business unit level SKUs, and they assign each of these SKUs to individual element. If I have a e-commerce shopping site that I'm maintaining for my business unit that is selling to consumers, being able to assign SKUs to that e-commerce shopping site where the SKUs are assigned at the level where it is not only the infrastructure that is consumed for that SKU, but the manpower involved in maintaining that e-commerce site, and then giving a report at the end of the month saying that your e-commerce site really resulted in $20,000 worth of consumption from IT, and your e-commerce site probably produced $1 million in revenue, but $20,000 is the consumption from internal IT. That level of SKU and SKU assignment to individual applications and business unit related things, and giving that SKU level costing not just based on infrastructure elements, but based on the consumption of manpower is what the IT as a service provider revolution is calling for, and those are the three big trends that we see.
Right. Thanks, Verma. And I think that there's actually a question that we have that's around how do you do the billing and chargeback. Can you talk a little more about how that, how would you, as a service provider, obviously you need to figure out how to charge and account for those things in your platform?
Great question. So any kind of charge from IT consists of essentially three components. Number one component is infrastructure, more at the capital expenses or operational expenses at the infrastructure element level, which is if it is internal infrastructure that is operated by a private cloud, you kind of really decompose that over the life cycle of that infrastructure and then convert that CapEx into some element of what you kind of consume on a per month basis. It's only one small piece of the puzzle. The second piece of the puzzle, which is IT consumption of resources that are needed to maintain that, right? You know, if it is an e-commerce site and you have a database administrator and you, from an internal IT, you know that 30% of that internal the database administrator is getting consumed towards maintaining the database that is powering this particular e-commerce site, right? You know certain costing parameter to that, right? And then the third element is the overheads involved in overall maintaining the operations, including the IT oversight and SLA maintenance and the tools that are used to maintain the entire upkeep. That's the third element. Now, taking those three elements, what we have seen, we have some great case studies in this particular area with one or two large enterprises that we did. We kind of helped the customer's IT organization to create SKUs. And, in the Vistara platform, you can create those SKUs, and those SKUs comprises of those three elements, and then you assign that SKU to individual element that is participating in the thing. So if you have a database server, to the database server you assign a SKU saying that it is $450 per month. That is not just the hardware cost, that involves all the other elements that I spoke about, and then assign a SKU, and at the end of the month when you generate a report, you generate a report which consists of IT consumption both from element level as well as resource point of view, and then go to the business unit both with the availability report and costing report, saying that this is what is maintained, what is spent. That's how IT organizations in the new era, in the modern IT era, are perceived, and that's how the IT organizations need to respond if they have to truly become like a service provider.
So, and if you think about providing those services and the rich menu that require, what are some of the things that IT teams need to start to do to think about that journey to get there?
Yeah. So there are two pieces of it. One element of it is to do with infrastructure and the consumption of infrastructure. Do I need to build an internal private cloud to meet the demands, or can I leverage public cloud completely, or is the better metric is to use internal private cloud and use for bursting public cloud or hybrid cloud in that manner. So the number one parameter to kind of do that is where is the consumption, and how do I kind of look at the capacities and decide where to kind of provision this the application across private and public and on-premise, right? Hybrid. That's one piece of the puzzle. Second piece of the puzzle is how do I organize my resources? Do I hire some of these resources in-house for managing this entire infrastructure, or can I use some external service provider on demand and make that external service provider to come when I need? So while I keep the command center, it's so-called functional sourcing. It's not outsourcing. You're not outsourcing the entire IT, but you're functionally tap into external providers. So being able to build a command center and then make a decision on what functional elements that I wanted to kind of leverage from external providers and partners that I know in my ecosystem, and make them come on demand when I need, or I make them come on a monthly basis, set a number of recurring revenue contracts. Those are the big parameters that play into overall decision on how to kind of source from element level and then at the service personnel level.
And I think we've talked about having the ability to either time-bound or other ways to restrict access based on roles and the kinds of things that they're able to do, and all remotely. We're not saying they're going to come in unless it's an on-prem.
Yes. The beauty with this is with the modern IT is everything is federated, and you don't necessarily need to make your service partner, the functional service partner, to come on-premise to do this work. The beauty is you can make them come remotely as long as you can give compliance and auditability on what that external partner did in this environment. And a platform like Vistara has those elements to be able to tap on a time-bound access to external partners, external providers, and make sure that everything that the partner did is video recorded and tied so that I can give it to the business unit. Look, as far as you are concerned, my internal IT delivered this, and I have audit recording and compliance to everything that we did for your application. And passing through the compliance PCI and SOX and HIPAA compliance reports and flying colors because everything is audited.
Now, I know we've had a number of customers talk about hybrid cloud and some of the challenges in bringing together all their different cloud resources and how they manage them. Have you seen, what were those challenges? What are some of the best practices then?
Yeah, so I think there are two elements to it. Being able to kind of bring them in one view and providing role-based access to individual elements. If I'm a web server administrator, I should have access to only web servers. Maybe I'm bursting some in my private cloud, and maybe on demand, I'm probably bursting to a public cloud. Being able to give that role-based access, and that's one piece of the puzzle. But more important piece of the puzzle is giving complete lifecycle management on those elements, not just necessarily just giving role-based access to do, but entire lifecycle management from monitoring, preventive care, like heartbleed that caused all the web server forms that were provisioned in all the public clouds about 2 months ago with the security bug, right? I need to be able to patch all those elements immediately on an SSL patch that got released. So being able to have that visibility from a lifecycle management beyond giving visibility is a critical piece that enterprise IT organizations are looking for. Integrating them to create a command center, providing lifecycle management on top of that to act like a true service provider is critical element. There are a lot of brokerage, metering kind of things that you can provision, and then you can figure out how much the dollars that you are going to bill to Amazon, but that is only 1/100th of overall lifecycle management that the IT needs to do to give the uptime and then charge the entire uptime required resources as a service provider to the business unit.
It's a good segue to our last question, and what are some of those overall best practices as organizations think about evolving to being a service provider?
Yeah, so it varies from enterprise maturity. In small to mid enterprises, there are certain best practices that needs to be followed. And when you go to larger enterprises, the best practices needs to be aligned with the compliance requirements and things like that, because as you can imagine, if you are operating an e-commerce shopping site, you need to be PCI compliant. What is that you need to do in this modern IT, in the hybrid cloud environment, to absolutely maintain that the element of necessity of PCI compliance, and making sure that every piece of the practice that you follow in bursting to the public clouds and operating on those public clouds are all compliant with PCI compliances that you need to do. So in best practices, it varies from, number one, capacity analysis and understanding where it is cost effective to kind of burst this activity in the context of IT as a service provider. Number two, best practices in operations management and monitoring, right? Do I have at my disposal all the best practices monitoring templates that I need to apply if my e-commerce shopping site is running on Amazon, right? Being able to kind of make sure that I don't get surprised by my business unit to come and say, do you know my site is not running? That should never be the case. So being able to provide those best practice templates so that you can apply them, and IT always is the first to know on what happened in the environment, not being surprised. So being able to give operations procedures, best practices operations procedures, standard operating procedures that needs to be applied on in operations maintenance on those things. That's the third one. And the fourth one is compliance reports. There are, in each area, there are a number of best practices. Vistara brings some of those best practices, not to kind of give our own plug. Because we operate as a SaaS platform, we bring those best practices out of the box from the platform.
And we actually answered a question that just came on. Is Vistara available as an on-prem and in-cloud solution?
Yeah, it is architected as a multi-tenant SaaS platform. There is a small element of Vistara that sits on the end customer's environment, and which is the data collector as well as a proxy to kind of get connected to the environment there, but it is operated as a SaaS platform.
Okay. That, I think, concludes our session today. Thank you, Varma, and thank you all for joining today. We hope you're able to learn about transforming IT as a service provider, and hope you have a great day.